Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Monroe Carmen. I'm president of the Press Club and editor-at-large at Bloomberg Business News. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio or the Global Internet Computer Network. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of some upcoming speakers. Tomorrow, June 8th, film critics Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert will mark the 20th anniversary of their television show with their view of the state of the movie industry. And speaking of movies, on Friday, June 16th, actress Sharon Stone, who will be in town for the annual National Race for the Cure, will talk about wellness, fitness, and a positive attitude. And on Thursday, June 22nd, Robert Wright, the president of NBC, will discuss television in the changing society. Transcripts and audio and video tapes of Press Club luncheons are available by calling 1-800-NPC-2334. That's a new number, 1-800-NPC-2334. Thank you. If you have any questions for our speakers, please write them on the cards provided at your table. Pass them up to me and I will ask as many as time permits. And now I'd like to introduce our head table and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. From your right, Cynthia Ramsey of the American Petroleum Institute. Llewellyn King, publisher, King Publishing Group. Maria Riccio, Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Donald Blinken, the U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Hungary. Richard Whittle of the Dallas Morning News. Mr. Bakros, the Minister of Finance of the Republic of Hungary, has not been able to arrive yet, but we hope he still will join us during the program. Skipping over our speaker, Mark Johnson, Media General News Service and Chairman of the NPC Speakers Committee. Georgi Banlaki, Ambassador of the Republic of Hungary. Bill Hickman, a member of the National Press Club Speakers Committee, who arranged today's luncheon. Thank you, Bill. Nancy Dunn of the Financial Times. Martin Chase, Kiplinger Washington editors, and Douglas Harbrecht of Business Week magazine. Our speaker today is a most intriguing individual. He is a former communist. He helped to put down the uprising by Hungarian freedom fighters against Soviet rule in 1956. He is a socialist and heads the Socialist Party in his country. On the surface, these appear to be an improbable set of credentials for the man that Hungarians have chosen to lead them in the new political landscape of Europe that sees the rough and tumble economics of the free market as the avenue to prosperity. Yet, take a close look at what Gyula Horn has been doing since he became Prime Minister of his country last July. In March, his government announced an austerity program designed to reduce the annual budget deficit and the public debt. He's proposed cuts in government spending, including spending for welfare. He's letting energy prices rise to market levels, and he's seeking to privatize as many state-run companies and industries as he can. Prime Minister Horn also encourages as much foreign investment in his country as he can, which is a principal reason for his visit to the United States this week. Indeed, Mr. Horn fits in well with today's Washington. Given his recent program, he might even qualify as a Republican. To emphasize the capitalist nature of his visit, Mr. Horn is accompanied by Finance Minister Lajos Bakros and Central Bank President George Soranyi. They are regarded as the dream team, the intellectual brain trust behind the new financial program. Hungary indeed holds particular appeal for foreign investors. It has attracted almost 50% of all foreign investment in the Central European region since democracies there began to cast off the Soviet yoke some 6 years ago. And most of that foreign investment has come from the United States. Mr. Horn has also expressed his interest in having his country join both NATO and the European Union. Hungary, a landlocked nation of 10 million people, also is very much affected by the current Balkan crisis. That war that is devastating Bosnia could spill over into other countries in the area, including Hungary, despite the best efforts of Europeans to isolate the battle. Perhaps Mr. Horn will give us his views on the appropriate American role in Bosnia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the National Press Club podium the Prime Minister of Hungary, Gyula Horn.
Elnök úr, hölgyeim és uraim! Köszönöm szépen ezt az ismertetést. Ez igaz.
And that is true.
Még ha az igazság a szélesebb és teljesebb is.
Even though the truth is wider and broader based. I agree that I could quite easily become a Republican.
Nos, 3,5 napja tartózkodunk az Egyesült
We have been in the United States of America for 3 days and a half.
És ez a 3,5
These 3 days and a half,
amelynek jó részét
most part of which
országának vezetőivel töltöttük el.
we have spent with the leaders of your country,
Számomra rendkívül
to
tanulságos.
me has been most informative.
Miért?
Why, you may ask me?
Mindenek előtt azért,
Primarily because
mert önöknek olyan elnökük van,
you have got a president in your country,
Clinton elnök úr,
President Clinton.
olyan adminisztrációk van,
You have got an administration, you have got a government,
és olyan kongresszusok,
and you have got a Congress
amelyek érdemben foglalkoznak
which
közép-kelet-európai
deal
régióval.
in merit with the East Central European region.
Abban az értelemben,
In the sense
hogy konkrét cselekvést folytatnak,
that you do concrete actions
az ottani változások megerősítése,
to strengthen the changes
az
there
átalakulási folyamat nagyon nehéz feladatainak megvalósításába való.
to materialize and support and assist the process of transformation in the region.
Ez nem mindig volt jellemző minden
This has
amerikai kormány.
not been a characteristic feature of all American administrations, and we very much appreciate this. I can say that on the experience of yesterday and on earlier days' experience. It is well known that US now
Az egyetlen globális hatalom
is the only global power in the world,
óriási lehetőségei,
with huge potentials, opportunities,
gazdasági, politikai vagy
be
katonai.
it economic, political or military.
Én azt hiszem, hogy az amerikai
I think that the American leadership
felismerte,
recognized
hogy ez a globális szerep
that this global role
kihívást is jelent.
presents a major challenge
Egyfajta morális kötelezettség.
and also a kind of moral obligation
Különböző térségében zajló folyamatokért.
for the various ongoing processes in the various parts of the world. I must also add,
Vagy ez nem csak nagy kötelezettség,
this is not only an obligation,
lehetőség.
but this is also an opportunity for the US
Nagyságánál, erejénél fogva.
because of its size and strength to fulfill these obligations.
Miért hangsúlyozom ezt?
Why do I emphasize this?
Mert úgy ítélem meg,
Because in my judgment that the East Central European region,
Lengyelországig,
from Russia to Poland and from Poland down to Bulgaria,
ennek a régiónak
this region
feladata vagy kulcs.
In this region, the key duty, the key challenge is how we shall manage to implement transformation.
Ez a régió, amely elég sok
This region that has a lot of unstable elements
sikerrel végigviszi a
should be
stabilizációt,
able to succeed the process of stabilization.
ettől függ döntő részt
Largely depends
egészének a stabilitása is.
on the stability of the European
Az
continent.
európai stabilitás
And European stability
meghatározó
is a decisive element of the stability of the world.
Ami bennünket illet,
As far as we are concerned,
elnök úr, ez így
Mr.
van.
President, it is true,
Mai vezetők közül nagyon sokan
many of the present leaders in the East Central European region
kommunisták voltak,
were former communists,
magam is.
including myself.
Hozzá szeretném rögtön tenni,
I would also like to add right away
hogy ugyanakkor ezek
that at the same time, these
a
communists,
reformer kommunisták,
these are the reform communists that launched reforms both in Hungary and elsewhere in the region.
tulajdonképpen saját erőből
They
tették végig
They did out of their own
társadalmi
will
rendszerre,
and
szabadság,
energy,
demokrácia rendszerére való
course of democracy, freedom, and did the transition.
1988-ban Magyarország
In 1988, bills were adopted in Hungary
szabadságára,
about the freedom of enterprise,
politikai és gazdasági vállalkozás szabadságára,
about the freedom of political and economic freedom enterprise at the time when the Warsaw Pact still existed
a KGST.
and the Comecon also
A
existed.
reformerőknek
The
köszönhetően
reform, due to the reform powers in Hungary, the people knew also in the past,
inkább,
and
hogy mi az,
even more so now, they knew what market economy it was and is.
ennek legalább 20 éves múltja van Magyarország.
We have got a tradition of 20 years at least in Hungary,
Hozzá szeretném,
and I would also like to add,
hogy számomra
to me,
abban a régióban
in that region, in our region,
az egyik legmegbecsültebb ember
One of-
Mihail Gorbacsov.
one of the greatest, greatly respected persons is Mikhail Gorbachev,
1985-ös
who when he came to office and following that in 1985
tett egy olyan óriási nagy
made a
cselekedetet,
immense step and
amelyet
act
senki más
that no one else in the region, perhaps no one in the world had the courage to do, and that was
azzal a
he
korábbi
gave
politikával,
up the earlier Soviet policy and practice
amelyik ráerőszakolt
which
a szovjet rendszer
imposed the Soviet system, the Stalinist system on the Allied countries. Gorbachev
megteremtette
created
a váltás lehetőség
possibilities of a free change of system for the countries of East Central Europe.
reformernek,
For him, as a reformer,
mi érdeme van abban,
he has got a historic merit
sok elkezdődhet.
that those changes started and has reached the phase where they are now.
És százával és ezrével tudnám azok,
Hundreds and thousands could be enumerated who have done a lot over the past period in the recent years for the sake of this transformation.
tehát mindaz, ami a világban kialakult,
Whatever has been created in the world,
mindaz, ami új helyzetet teremtett,
whatever has created the new situation in the relationship of world politics,
éppen
these all
egy olyan kölcsönös erőfeszítéseknek köszönhető,
can be due to mutual efforts,
amely egyfelől
which on the one hand
saját reformerők tevékenységét, másfelől pedig
the activity of our own internal reform forces,
jelent.
on the other also the support of the Western democracies.
Hangsúlyozni
I would like to emphasize that the political transformation
sokkal könnyebben és rövidebb idő alatt megy végbe.
takes place more easily and during a shorter period of time than the economic social transformation.
A politika átalakulása
The political transformation means at the moment in the East Central European region
így Magyarország
that the states, including Hungary, very clearly committed
több pártrendszer,
for multi-party system, parliamentarism, state ruled by law and the implementation of human rights.
kiépültek a hatalmi struktúra.
The power structure, the elements of power structures have been established, including the government.
Úgyhogy meggyőződésem szerint
I am convinced that
valamennyi országban
without any exception in all the countries,
politika rendszerbe végbe ment,
what went on in these countries is irreversible.
hozzátennék valamit,
I would also like to add something.
hogy Magyarország szempontjából
From the point of view of Hungary, this is why it is important.
mert hiszen hosszú évszázadok óta először
Since centuries, this is the first time we are now in the situation,
80-as évek második felébe és a 90-es évek elején,
in the second half of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, that we were free to decide about the construction of a social system that we chose for ourselves. Just in the same way as we freely decided whether we want to join a alliance.
egyetlen hatalom sem diktálja nekünk,
No power dictates that on us, because it comes from our own recognition, from our conviction.
kívántam aláhúzni,
I want to underline this
hogy világos legyen, hogy a mi
to make it clear that our accession to the NATO
szerepvállalás
and the further role of the NATO in Europe
nem azt jelenti,
does not mean
ez sorol, hogy a NATO
primarily that the NATO wants to expand, wants to enlarge,
hanem azt jelenti,
but it means
hogy egy sor új ország
that the number of new countries apply now for membership in the NATO. One of these countries is Hungary. These countries, and I'm talking about on behalf of Hungary now, comply with the conditions and requirements of NATO membership. I wish to underline this because
szerint megközelíteni.
this is how NATO should approach the question.
Ha kétséges,
And it is hardly doubtful that the alliance
nincs alapja arra, hogy
does not have any ground to refuse our claim
hogy csatlakozzon.
for membership in the alliance.
Ami a gazdasági, szociális átalakítás.
As far as the economic social transformation is concerned,
Szeretném önöknek
I would like to bring it to your kind attention
egy kitaposatlan úton van.
that we are following an unbeaten track.
Tudnélik, arról van szó.
Because actually what we are having now,
Piacgazdaságot kezdtünk és folytatunk építeni.
we started to build and we continue to build market economy.
De olyan piacgazdaságot
A market economy
felülről lefelé
that is being built from the top down, that is managed from the top down to the bottom.
emlékezzenek vissza.
You will kindly remember
Nyugat-Európában,
in Western Europe,
nyugaton széles,
in the West,
alulról fölfelé.
it started from the grassroots level and the private enterprise came into being and created what now exists in Western Europe, in the Western world. It is taking place in the reversed order in Hungary.
Csak egy példát említek.
Let me just mention one example in this relation.
Olyan tömeges privatizációra, ami nálunk zajlik,
A privatization of a scale that you can see in Hungary.
ebben nem volt még példa.
Neither in the world nor in the history has been exemplified yet.
Gyakorlatilag egy
Practically,
totális
a complete, total,
tulajdonból
centralized state asset. We shall go to the dominance of private ownership. It is the Hungarian government is determined that before the end of 1997 this dominance will be created, which in practice means that
magántulajdon részesedése
the share of the private sector in the GDP will reach about 75 up to about 80%.
és kivétel nélkül
And without exception,
minden stratégiai ágazat energiállátástól kezdve
practically every strategic branch, energy sector and others will be part of the privatization process. I would also like to stress this fact.
mert ez nagy
This is important and this gives also great opportunity
számára is, hogy részt vegyenek
to
ebben a
American investors to participate in this process of privatization.
rendkívül fontos.
It is extremely important also to bear in mind that this privatization,
Munkahelyek 10 és 100 ezrei szűnnek.
tens and hundreds of jobs are thousands and
Munkahelyek százezrei csak és szűnnek meg.
hundreds of thousands of jobs are eliminated.
Így 1990 óta 1 millió 200 000 munkahely szűnt meg Magyarországon.
1992, 1,2 million jobs were eliminated in Hungary.
Márpedig önök tudják, az Egyesült Államokban.
You know in the United States what jobs mean, what a challenge it is to any government, in a similar fashion to our government too. It is vitally important for us to create new jobs because outdated plants and factories have to be eliminated. At the same time, new modern companies have to be created, and we need financial resources. In connection with this, we have got discussions, disputes with the European Union. European Union says you can join us if you fulfill the conditions. These are very concrete and very strict conditions, not in general terms. How much the deficit of the budget, the deficit of the current account can be. The conditions are justifiable, but it is also obvious that these conditions alone of our own strength are not able to fulfill. The West, without the contribution and cooperation of the West, we cannot do it, because there are no free financial resources available in the region, and not in Hungary either. I would also like to add one thing. It is out of the question that this is not about egoist interest in the process of the transformation, a kind of unilateral aid also. I would like to underscore, because there are misunderstandings around this. We are not talking about that billions of money are put into the region in the form of support and aid. I know there are charitable support, there are charitable organizations. This is also very important. But what we offer and what happens in practice is none other than business. Because in Hungary and in other countries of the region, it is, the market is extremely absorbent. I would also like to add, this is not a third world region, East Central Europe, because qualified, skilled labor is available. Alone in the Central European, not to count Ukraine, and 120 million skilled labor, qualified labor is available. At the same time, as far as wages and salaries are concerned, they are extremely low. Very serious advantages, conditions are available for the potential investors. What we say that we want cooperation with the West in an asymmetric way, in economy and financial affairs. Asymmetric when the countries that have capital appear in the region, invest, and they will get back the profit, and if it is necessary, also their invested capital. This is a mutually beneficial business economic cooperation. The political importance of it is also very important, because this is how we can mitigate and ease the huge social tensions coming from losing the jobs and coming from other conditions and factors. Because it was also characteristic of previous years, the old regime, which in my opinion, which had two decisive negative features. One is the regime was anti-democratic. The other was against achievements and performance. Did not perform. Perform not in line with the expectations of the society and the economy. Well, in connection with this latter one, I would like to stress that performance, achievement, we need techniques and technology development, which indeed
kategóriába a régiót.
will not leave the region in a backward state.
Hogy szakítani kell.
We also have to do away with the practice that a number of countries
Rendszer alatt
during the previous regime,
a teljesítmény és a szociális
performance and the social
hitelekből,
care
kölcsönökből próbálta fedezni.
was financed from foreign loans.
Ez nem tartható tovább,
This cannot be maintained any longer. We all recognize it,
és elhatározta
and we determined
további reformlépések megtétele,
to take further reform steps,
amely összhangba hozza
which is brings in line
teljesítményével.
the expenses with the actual achievements of the economy.
Ezt megint elsőként Magyarország ismerte.
This is again Hungary that first recognized it.
Remélem, hogy más ország
I
bizony
hope they will recognize this also in other countries, the necessity of this in other countries as well.
És végül még valamit.
And finally, let me say one more.
Természetesen a mi térségünk
Naturally, for our region, for Hungary,
kulcsfontosságú
it is of key issue security.
biztonság,
Security,
amely sok tekintetben,
which in many ways over the past years has not become stronger.
sőt megrendült.
However, I would even say that has shaken.
Nem gondolta azt,
No one thought
hogy néhány évtizeddel a második világ
that after a few decades after finishing ending the Second World War,
legértelmetlenebb háborúja,
the most senseless war will break out in Bosnia.
legértelmetlenebb háború.
Because this is a senseless, meaningless war, and
Itteni washingtoni megbeszélések során
during my discussions in Washington D.C., we devoted a lot of attention to this issue too.
Magyarország, amely különösen
Hungary, which is especially in a sensitive situation,
ország a szomszédja.
because Serbia and Croatia are neighboring countries.
Százezrével élnek,
Hundreds of thousands of Hungarians live there.
nagyon megfontolt.
To us, we have to follow a very clear and determined policy. We handle it.
És úgy közelítjük meg
We,
ezt a kérdést.
our approach to this question is that there should not be,
Politikai erőfeszítéseket abban hagyni.
should not stop the diplomatic political efforts. At the same time, the community of nations have to make more determined
Hogy remény legyen.
steps in other areas to have a hope to end the war.
Én azt szeretném aláhúzni,
I would like to underscore
hogy ez a biztonság
that this security
és biztonsági kihívás
and this security challenge
ugyanakkor azt is,
at the same time also means
hogy Közép-Kelet-Európa
that East Central Europe
lesz ítélve.
will be destined for failure
Ha egymás
if
szemben
against each other,
érdekeinek a rovására próbálja a saját biztonságát megtenni.
if they want to ensure their own security against the interest of others.
Annyira szükség, mint napjainkban.
We never ever needed so much than nowadays that the states of East Central Europe should try to materialize, implement the policy of historic reconciliation.
Nagyon sok sérelem halmozott.
There have been various bad feelings in the region. The Hungarians have got in connection with the neighbors, so do the neighbors in connection with us.
Amelyek jó részéről egyikünk se tehet.
We can't help about this. The present generation, the present policy cannot help. Our opinion is,
Múltba révedezünk el.
if we just look back into the past and licking the old wounds, we shall not have energy to solve the present problems. We have got to look to the future. We have got to reconcile with the neighbors. We have got to make symbolic steps, and we have got to prove that we are not cross with each other. Because I'm convinced
Demonstrálnunk kell
we have to
az
demonstrate
élet országok felé azt,
towards the developed countries
hogy nem egymást öljük,
that we are not killing each other,
máinkat számoljuk.
but we are annihilating and eliminating our problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. You spent years as a diplomat in Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia. How do you view the war there? Are the UN and the United States following the correct policies? And will American troops be required?
Igen, 6 évet töltöttem Jugoszláviában, mint diplomat.
Yes, indeed, as a diplomat, I spent 6 years in Yugoslavia.
Egy rendkívül kedves ország.
It's an extremely nice country.
Hadd mondjam el, hogy
May I tell you that, in my opinion,
alapvetően két
basically there are two keys.
kérdés van ma.
There are two key issues in connection with the Yugoslav crisis now.
Az egyik,
One is
hogy Szerbia,
that Serbia,
kis Jugoszlávia,
or smaller Yugoslavia,
vezette kormány,
and the government headed by Milosevic, what is his relationship
a boszniai helyzetet, a boszniai
to the Bosnian situation and to the struggles and fights led by the Bosnian Serbs? It is my conviction
Szerbiának is érdeke.
that it is in the interest of Serbia, that it is their vital interest
Teljes mértékben elszigetelje az agrosszorokat.
to completely isolate the aggressors.
Nemzetközi közösségnek legfontosabb feladata,
The most important duty, one of the most important duties of the international community would be
hogy erről meggyőzze
to convince of this
a szerb vezetést.
the Serbian leadership.
Garancia arra,
It can also be a guarantee
időn belül megszűnik háború, vagy befejeződik háború.
that the war will come to an end within the foreseeable future. The other,
Az ENSZ helyesen járt el,
the United Nations was correct, and I think
hogy minden katonai
every
vállalkozás
military
lehet fogadni abban az esetben,
enterprise or act is acceptable in the case
határozaton nyugszik.
if it is based on the resolution of the United Nations, because
Demokratikusan, nemzetközi
United Nations is democratic
éve hozza meg a döntést.
and brings in a democratic fashion on behalf of the nations of United Nations.
Ugyanakkor azt is figyelembe
At the same time, we also have to consider
meglehetősen
that the possibilities of the UN are rather limited.
korcsenek olyan eszközeim,
They don't have the means and instruments like the NATO does.
és bárki is
Whoever criticizes those recent steps taken,
azoknak a figyelmébe ajánlom,
I would like to bring it to the kind attention of those.
lépésre kerülhet még sor a
The
háború
further
érdekében.
steps could be taken in order to end the war
Se lehet ma biztosan állítani, hogy célra vezet.
that right now we cannot safely say that will take us to the good end. The situation is very special there, and there are all sorts of means and ways, and they have to be tested before we find the most adequate one.
And the question of sending U.S. troops to Bosnia, yes or no or maybe?
Nem, talán.
Én nem akarok beavatkozni az amerikai belpolitikába.
I do not want to interfere into the internal policy of the United States.
Then a question about the arms embargo. Should it be lifted so the Bosnian Muslims can defend themselves?
Meg kell szüntetni. Függeszteni a boszniai szervek népességmunkat.
Én nem értek egyet semmiféle felfüggesztéssel vagy megszüntetéssel mindaddig,
I do not agree with any suspension or lifting before we have got evidence
hogy hajlandók a nemzetek közösségének a döntéseit érvényesíteni.
willing to implement and enforce the decisions of the community of nations.
Is there a Hungarian minority in the territory of the former Yugoslavia?
Magyar kisebbsége volt Jugoszlávia területén.
How large is it and where is it?
Mekkora és hol van
And what is its status in the current conflict?
a jelenlegi konfliktusban a helyzet?
Van összesen
Yes, there is
600 000 magyar él a volt
about
Jugoszlávia
600,000 living on the former Yugoslavia,
a Vajdaságban.
most of them living in Vojvodina in Serbia, also in Croatia and in Slovenia.
Most meg szeretném mondani, hogy a világ.
I would like to tell you that everywhere in the world the situation is, if there is a conflict somewhere, it is always the minorities who have to bear the greatest sacrifice. Now the situation, the plight of the Hungarians, the war aggravates their situation furthermore. Masses of young Hungarians were conscripted,
És nem véletlen,
and
hogy mi a
it
magyar
is not by
szerb
chance.
ezeket szóvá tettük.
And in our bilateral Serbian-Hungarian relations, we did raise the issue with them.
Gondok vannak a
There are problems
terén,
also in the field of ensuring their rights,
mindenek előtt Szerbiában.
primarily in Serbia.
Viszont ha enyhül a helyzet,
If the situation eases, we are ready
normális párbeszédet is
to conduct normal
folytat.
dialogue and normal relations with Serbia.
How worried are you that the fighting in Bosnia will spread to Hungary and other Central European countries?
Nem, ennek nincs
No,
realitás.
there is no reality,
Hála Isten.
thank God.
How is your relationship with Boris
Hogyan van a
Yeltsin?
kapcsolata Boris Jelcinnel?
Can he survive
Túlélni?
politically?
Politikailag?
Ezt majd tőle tessenek megkérdezni.
Well, I would like to ask you to ask him personally.
Are extremist political groups such as ultra-nationalists
Politikai csoportok, például ultranacionalisták,
forming in Hungary as they are in other former East Bloc countries?
mint olyan keleti blokk más volt országai.
Vannak kis létszámok.
There are in a small number, extremist groups there are in small number,
De
But-
van egy örvendetes dolog is,
but the good news is
hogy nincsenek képviselve a magyar parlament.
they are not represented in the Hungarian parliament.
A parlamenti választás
They participated in the election campaign last spring,
csoport sem jutott.
but neither group managed to get even one seat in the parliament. The Hungarian people are wise enough to reject and to refuse these extremists,
Számukra politikai hátterek.
and does not ensure any political background to them.
Turning to your privatization program,
Szóhoz fordulva,
is there resentment building within your country
országunkban
over selling state-run enterprises to foreign investors?
külföldi beruházóknak adják át.
Vannak viták erről.
There are disputes, for instance, in connection with the electricity board, electricity company, and the supply of electricity. There have been various trade union positions that this should not be given to foreign hands.
Hozzá szeretném tenni.
I would like to add that, for instance, in France, also French partners tell that the electricity,
Állami tulajdonban, hogy tartják 100%.
they want to keep it in 100% state property.
Az a vélemény,
Our opinion is
olyan rekonstrukció
that
szorul az egész villamos.
the whole electricity industry needs reconstruction, the power stations, the network and others, that all these, without the involvement of foreign capital, cannot be modernized. This is the reason why we need to involve foreign capital, and in my judgment, the majority, overwhelming majority of the society approves of it.
Can you tell us why your government stopped the sale of Hungar hotels to U.S. investors? And what kind of a message does that send?
Ez milyen üzenetet küldött?
Örülök, hogy feltették ezt a kérdést.
Thank you very much for putting this question.
Először is
First,
egy félreértés volt a téma kapcsán.
there was a misunderstanding
Sajtóban.
in the press in connection with this question, because in connection with the Hungar hotels,
A tulajdonos
the owner
szerződés kötési kötelezettséget nem vállal.
did not assume any obligation to sign a
Nem
contract.
abban az időszakban avatkozott be a kormány.
The government intervened not at a time when there was a valid contract.
A második
The second thing I would like to say,
vizsgálatot, amelyet el
the
kellett
investigation that had to be done and that had been started by me personally,
azt indokolta,
the justification for that was
felmerült a megalapozott gyanúja,
that there was a grounded suspicion that law was violated when the tender was issued and when the tenders were evaluated. So the law was violated, and the investigation justified that it
sértették az érvényben lévő törvényt,
So-
az érvényben lévő jogszabályok.
the laws were violated that were in
És
effect.
ehhez csak egy harmadik fontos.
And let me just add a third important element that
Ebből a privatizációból
practically out of this
15 szálloda eladásával
particularly out of this privatization, which meant selling 15 hotels, we could hardly derive any revenue. That is the Republic of Hungary.
Valamiféle viskókról van szó, vagy lerobban.
And actually we are not talking about slums or huts or very poor hotels. World standard hotels were among them on the River Danube, hotels that were built, financed partly or fully from the foreign loans that we are now repaying.
Végül is mi fizetjük meg
So we are paying for that, we Hungarians,
az ellenére.
the costs of building these hotels. This is why it is not all the same to us. When privatized, to have a realistic price, not
Milyen a
some outdated old building.
hozzá szeretném
I would also tell you,
végül azt,
finally, that
hogy az nyilvánvaló volt, hogy
It was obvious
rendkívül ellentmondásosak
that there were contradictory
és hiányosak a korábbi privatizációval összefüggő kormányzat döntések és egyéb jogszabályok.
and there were loopholes in legislation on privatization.
Ezért is terjesztett be az új
This is why the new government submitted a new bill on privatization, which was adopted on the 9th of May,
és ez egyértelmű,
and this makes it absolutely clear which are the cases
központi beavatkozás.
when there is a need or there is no need for central interference. What we want, and this enable the legislation gives, we want that the government should not, that there should not be a need to interfere unless there is a violation of the law.
Is your country having more success at privatizing and creating a free market than Russia has had? And if so, why?
És ha igen, miért? Mint Oroszország és ha igen, miért?
Hát bevallom önöknek őszintén.
I must really honestly, I have never ever in my life received a question like this,
Kettőt összehasonlítani.
because the two countries cannot be compared.
Tudnélik, hogy privatizálnak Oroszországban?
How do they privatize in Russia?
Nemrég jártam Oroszországban.
I was quite recently paying a visit to the southern part of Russia.
Üzemet privatizálnak.
They privatized a company that employed 38,000 people, which means that they turned the company into a shareholding company. Every employee, the 38,000 employees received their own shares,
Ezzel befejezték a privatizációt.
and with this they declared the privatization process completed.
Hogy lesz egy fillér vagy egy dollár több lesz?
How they managed to produce $1 of profit, and they were not able to tell me that, how they are going to modernize that company, because they could not answer that question to me.
Ez az egyik.
This is one thing
Ilyen különbség van a...
this is a difference between Hungarian and Russian privatization.
A másik,
The other thing,
Oroszországban
that
nem ismerik
in Russia,
piacgazdaság.
they do not know what market economy is. Now they are trying to learn something about that.
Az egyik
In Russia,
kolhosz piaca.
market economy was something that the kolkhoz market.
Valaki a kolhosz
Somebody
piacra
went to the market
4 darab paradicsom.
and bought 4 potatoes or tomatoes.
Volt a piacgazdaság.
That was market economy in Hungary.
Létezik már piacgazdaság.
We have market economy for the past 20 years,
Hogy piacgazdaság
and the institutions of market economy have been gradually established. Do I need to tell you any more details? I think we could sit together until next afternoon.
Did you voluntarily embrace your current austerity program
A jelenlegi
and appeal for foreign investment
kemény pénzügyi program
as an economic model,
és a külföldi befektetések támogatása gazdasági modell.
or was it foisted on you by the International Monetary Fund and the Western governments?
Mind a kettő.
Both.
Legyünk őszinték.
To be quite honest, both reasons.
Egyrészt a mi saját
Partly,
elismerésünk,
it was our own recognition,
amelynek a lényege,
the essence of which is
nem költhetünk többet,
we cannot spend more
mennyire pénzünk van.
than we have enough money to spend.
Gondolom a családok is így élnek
I think
Amerikában.
this is how families live in America.
Ennyit költenek,
They can spend as
mennyit
much
keres a férj meg a feleség.
as much the wife and the husband earn.
Ezt teszi és eladósodik, annál
If they
rosszabb neki.
don't do that, if we've got debts, that's going to be a bad situation. So this is how, if we spend more, we shall have
Annak a
debts,
kamatai mind nagyobbak,
and the interest rates are becoming higher and higher, and we shall be in the red.
folyamat ment végbe.
So that was the process going on, and we recognize that process. On the other hand, the Western countries and the international financial institutions demanded that we should change. So actually the two met, own recognition and the demands of the banks and the financial institutions. Let me also add, a government must also be good-hearted.
De nem lehet egy kormány sem jótékonysági intézmény.
But no government can be a charitable organization or
A
institution.
nemzetközi pénzintézetek sem.
Just like the international financial organizations are not charitable humanitarian organizations. They demand what the partners should do.
Has the United States government done enough
Eleget tett az Egyesült Államok annak
to encourage new industries,
hogy új iparágokat,
especially high-tech industries,
iparágokat
to invest and develop
építson
in Eastern Europe?
Kelet-Európában.
Eleget tett,
Has done enough,
és eleget kell, hogy tegyen.
and they must do, that has to continue, because we have still a lot ahead of us in East Central Europe. I would also like to add, naturally,
Ebben sokkal kisebb szerepe van egy kormánynak, mint a nagy cégek.
the role of the government is much smaller than the role of the big companies on both sides. In Hungary, in your country, that the government has got to make certain conditions more favorable.
Így például mi számunkra
For us, for instance, it is necessary
megőrzés egy fontos intézményes elemnek,
to preserve certain institutional elements, to maintain GSP,
támogatásának,
to support
idéhez, és így
our accession to the OECD. This is what the governments can do. And naturally, they can also do
bizonyos alapokat hoznak létre,
that
és
they
töltenek
set
be
up certain
állami
funds and recapitalize in the auspices of government guarantees. But these are not of decisive importance. What is decisive, that the big companies, what they do.
Két dolgot szeretnénk hangsúlyozni.
I would like to emphasize two
Nem
things.
csupán arról van szó, hogy az
We are not only talking that the
első helyen állnak Magyarországon
the-
befektetés volumenét.
as far as the volume of investment is concerned, the American investors take the first place.
És ha én amerikai lennék,
If I were an American,
nagyon vigyáznék arra, hogy ezt az első helyet meg,
I would be very careful to preserve this first place.
hanem az is,
But it is also
hogy az amerikai cégek
that the American companies
sokat hajtanak végre,
make investments
sok munkahelyet teremtenek,
which create a lot of jobs,
és ez rendkívül fontos.
and this is extremely important, as I mentioned earlier. Secondly,
Tényleg a
that indeed
technika,
techniques,
fejlett technika és
high-tech technology, the newest developments of the high technology are brought in the
nem
country,
pedig a
not the
jó néhány évvel ezelőtt.
ones going back to many years ago, the ones are discarded.
Olyan cégeket,
I can
General Electric,
enumerate companies like General Electric, IBM, Ford, etc.
Thank you. Now, can you give us some idea of when you hope to join the European Union and NATO? Do you have a timetable in mind? And secondly,
Ennek az időzítéséről. Másfelől,
what do you see as the purpose
miben látja
of an expanded NATO?
NATO célját, értelmét?
Ami az első kérdést illeti,
As far as the first question is concerned,
2000, december 24-én délelőtt 10 óra.
at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 24th of December, the year 2000,
Karácsonyi ajándék.
as a Christmas gift.
Készek vagyunk
We are
és aláírni a megállapodást.
ready to sign the agreement with the European Union on our accession.
Úgyhogy ha akkor találkozunk,
If we meet then,
látjuk, hogy
we can justify,
bevált ez a jóslat, vagy
we can see whether this prediction has come true.
mi kell ehhez megtesz.
As far as we are concerned, we shall do our utmost to comply with the conditions. Now it's up to the European Union.
Jól fejlődnek a kapcsolatok,
The relations are progressing well.
hogy a visegrádi négyek így
The Visegrad Group and the associated countries are present there in every important there in the structural institutions of the EU. As far as the expansion of the NATO is concerned, I'm convinced that it is not only Hungary or other acceding countries will have a benefit, but it is also good for the NATO. It's a great spiritual, physical capacity that we bring in if we are members in the NATO. Our knowledge, know-how, experience of the region, of the world, whether it will further expand the opportunities for a greater role in Europe. I'm convinced if NATO takes it serious, that they have to assume responsibility for the international or European processes. They cannot close the doors to accept new applicant countries.
Last question.
Thank you. Yes. Before we get to the last question, a few gifts, a certificate of appreciation for being with us today, a National Press Club mug, which will enable you to either drink coffee or solicit funds for investment in your country.
Thank you very much.
And finally, some of the most famous photographs of our presidents taken by American photographer George Thames. Last question. The questioner says that the freedom of the press rating of your country has fallen in recent times. What can you say about why the freedom of the press has fallen, and what is the future for more freedom opportunities for the press?
Tudom, nehéz elhinni, amit mondasz.
I know it is difficult to believe what I'm going to say.
Tévedhetnek, vagy hibázhatnak.
It is not only governments that can make a mistake,
Újság,
but also
újságíró.
a newspaper can also make a mistake, or a journalist can make a mistake.
Tudom,
I
én mindig
know.
azt hallottam, hogy
I
nem
always
szabad
said,
arra kerülni az újságírókkal.
don't get cross with journalists, because I will be on the losing side.
Úgyhogy egy politikusnak nem szabad velük vitába keveredni.
So politicians get into controversy with them, and I think I always manage to do so.
Freedom House nem néz, vagy nem ismeri.
I am sorry that Freedom House is not fully aware
Szívesen beszél.
about, and they're kindly invited to talk in Hungary. Let me tell you two things. One is that this government was the one that during 11 months put an end to 2 papers, actually 3, which have nothing to do with the government and financed by the government.
És hangsúlyozni szeretném,
And I would like to emphasize there is no daily paper now
amelyik ne kritizálna nagyon keményen.
which would not criticize very strictly the government.
Nem így van.
It is not like this in the US.
Az elnököt
Everybody praises the president and the administration, but in Hungary we have not yet reached this stage.
Ami pedig az elektronikus
As far as broadcast media is concerned,
maradt az, hogy
we have inherited that we have to subsidize them from the budget, the television and the radio.
És a parlament válassza meg a két
The parliament elects
rádió és a televízió elnökét, vagy nevezi.
the and appoints the presidents of the radio television. The media bill is in front of the parliament already. It's up to the parliament now when they adopt it.
Reményeink és szándék
We hope, and it is our intention, it is expressed also in the bill,
teljes mértékben függetlenül.
will be completely independent of the government. That's the
És
rate.
ez megszületik ez a törvény.
And if this bill is adopted, which will be independent of the budget,
Egy nagy ünnepséget fogunk
then
adni Pesten.
we are going to organize a feast that evening.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Prime Minister. The Prime Minister asks that you remain in your seats until he and delegation have left. They have an appointment at the Treasury at 2 o'clock and must leave immediately, so please sit still for a little while. We were very honored.